And the funny thing to me is you see everyone doing it. It's a human nature thing. Today, let's talk about 8 car guy misconceptions. It's very high likelihood that you're committing one of these misconceptions. The first being bigger brakes equals better stopping distance. You're always gonna find edge cases, but generally speaking, that's not true. The reason you want upgraded brakes, better brakes, bigger brakes, compared to stock examples, such as my upgraded Brembos here, even though the disc is the same size, is because of thermal performance drop-off. So you do one stop from, let's say, 60 miles an hour to 0. Different brakes are going to perform essentially the same, assuming the car has the same tires and assuming the car has ABS. The reason being, the tires are the limiting factor in one immediate stop. The brakes aren't being overwhelmed and getting that hot from that single stop to compromise the braking performance. However, when you're doing canyon carving or track driving, performance driving, repeated inputs onto the brake, again and again, are building more and more heat, because that's all brakes are doing. They're taking kinetic energy of your car moving and transforming it into thermal energy, right? Conservation of energy. And in those instances, upgraded brakes are going to be very important. Again, there are some edge cases, such as if you had really sticky rubber on stock brakes, then that's a whole nother story. But generally speaking, this holds true. Next up is, pretend that I'm at a stop sign right now, or rather I should say a red light. And what many people will do is they'll keep this in first gear and hold their foot on the clutch. Holding the clutch in while staying in gear is not good for your throwout bearing, and I've seen many people do this, even those who are driving GT Porsches and very high-end cars. It's not a good practice. What you want to do is clutch out and keep it in neutral, and when the light turns green, you clutch in, go into first, and you start rolling. Number 3 is suboptimal hand position on the steering wheel. By the way, for those who are watch heads, we got the Revelo Mechadromo Mecha Quartz watch for less than $250, depends on which color you get. Some are closer to 200 or 190, some are a little bit more than 200. I think it's an awesome value, and it's not about having the expensive watch. Sometimes the cheap Mecha Quartz is all you need, and you get that automotive inspiration, perforated leather and such. So steering wheel hand position should generally be 9 and 3. But it's not just a matter of 9 and 3. We can talk about why 9 and 3 is better than 10 and 2, because you're going to have a more balanced and symmetric position on the wheel, which allows for the greatest control, more natural hand and shoulder position as well. Don't do 10 and 2. I don't know why that became a thing. 9 and 3 is what you want to do. However, you don't want to put wrap your thumbs around the wheel either. The reason being, if you were to get into an accident, now this is going to be more relevant on track, and also on sim racing, by the way. When you're sim racing, this is very important, because someone can just hit you from the back, and then if you have a powerful direct drive wheel, like I have a Simukube 2 Pro, which can, put 25 Newton meters through the wheel, you don't want to break your wrist or break your thumb or cause an injury. So you want to drive with your thumbs up like this. Very important for track and sim racing, not as important for street driving, but it's a good habit. So that if the wheel kicks away from you, you're not going to get your thumbs locked in there and increase the risk of an injury. Number 4, double clutching is useless. That is totally wrong, and only said by those people who don't know how to double clutch. As an example, my buddy Fenton from the Zygon YouTube channel, who drives a 1991 Acura NSX, said, "Hey man, when you drive my car, the synchros are failing, and I forgot to refresh them when I did the short gears, so please just shift slow." And I said, "Well, yes, but why don't I just double clutch?" He said, "Oh yeah, that's not something that I do personally, but if you want to double clutch, that's fine too." There are instances, even in modern day, where you should know how to double clutch. I was able to double clutch this car, drive it hard, shift it quickly, no issue. All these things are simply tools in your toolkit. I will even use double clutching when reviewing certain cars, because double clutching is, again, a tool in the toolkit that tells you certain things about a car's inputs. Throttle response, shifter feel, because double clutching is how you have to do it very quickly. And yes, modern cars that have synchros make it unnecessary, but if your synchros are failing, or you're driving an older car because you're a car enthusiast that likes driving cool shit, there we go, was able to hit that DSC off button just in time to get that in, then yes, double clutching is an important skill. We have a whole playlist on how to drive manual transmission, everything from you don't know how to drive stick in the first video to intermediate things like starting from a hill or rev match downshifting to the third most advanced video going over how to double clutch heel toe at the same time. Actually, I'll show you right now. So I'm in third, I'm in fourth. That was a double clutch heel toe from fourth into third. It sounds hard, but you get that muscle memory, it's not a big deal. Again, do it one more time. That was a double clutch, and when you get it right, it's so buttery smooth and it just like slots into gear effortlessly. The actual resistance getting from neutral into third there is so much lower when you double clutch correctly. And yes, there's satisfaction as well to just upping your driver skill, even if it's unnecessary. It should be fun when you say, hey, I don't know how to do this thing, I want to learn this skill, and you work toward it, and you see yourself improving as a driver. Number 5 is the default human behavior that when you're driving downhill, you go way faster, and when you're going uphill, you're going way slower. You'll see this tons of times on the highway. Everyone around you will be going way slower as you're driving up. They're going 55 or 60, and as they're going downhill over the hill, even though the speed limit hasn't changed, now they're going 90, and they're getting pulled over. The reason this is actually backwards and why you want to drive faster going uphill and slower going downhill is simply physics. A lot of that kinetic energy of you driving uphill is getting turned into potential energy, meaning you're at a higher height. You have greater potential energy with the force of gravity. So if all of a sudden you needed to slow down while you're going uphill and slam on your brakes, you will have a shorter stopping distance driving uphill compared to if you were going downhill. Because when you're going downhill, the opposite is true. Gravity is working against you. And if you need to brake quickly, it's going to take you even longer. Now, the reason why people do this is because as they drive up, to maintain a higher speed, they need to have their revs at a higher RPM. They feel like they're making the car work harder. It's uncomfortable and unnatural to them, and they think they may even be hurting the car. That's nonsense. Your car is designed to do things like that, and unless it's really old, has cooling issues, etc., you could probably afford to go a little bit faster when you're driving uphill. And the funny thing to me is you see everyone doing it. It's a human nature thing. And just because it's human nature and it's more natural doesn't mean it's the correct thing to do. I think that part of living a good life, which is a whole other conversation, but part of it is being more mindful of your biases, your tendencies, whatever evolution has trained you to believe, or whatever societal things have trained you to believe or behave in a certain way, and to control for them and act in the way that is actually intentional and aligned with what is correct. That's a long way of saying drive faster when you're going uphill and drive slower when you're going downhill. Number 6 is that higher octane is always better. There are different tiers of fuel, and I would agree that I like getting top tier fuel, things like Chevron or Costco as an example for my cars, because I care about the buildup in engines and I like whatever detergents and cleaners they have in those top tier fuels to keep my engine running better, longer. But I only put the octane that is recommended by the manufacturer. Meaning, if my car, which is not my Miata, but let's say I had another car that was 87 octane, there's no point in me going 91. I'm not getting any benefit by doing so. The main purpose of octane is to reduce the risk of getting premature ignition, also known as knock. If I put 87 in this car in a high performance engine, higher compression ratio, I'm running a higher risk of damaging the engine with knock. So yes, I should keep putting on 91 or 93 octane here in my Mazda Miata. But those who put in a higher octane than is recommended aren't doing their car any favors, and those who are putting a lower octane than recommended are actually doing damage to their engines. So the recommendation is choose top tier fuel sources, Chevron, Shell, Costco, things like that, and do the recommended octane by the manufacturer. Number 7 is the misconception that you need all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive to be safe in the snow. That's absolute nonsense. The more important thing is the tires you're using. Now we can talk about the argument of all-wheel drive versus four-wheel drive. Four-wheel drive may be better for off-road because you can manually set your center diff and the actual torque distribution, whereas with all-wheel drive, it's going to send torque automatically to the wheel that has less traction. And on snow, yes, having all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive can help if some of the wheels have lower traction. However, if you have an all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive vehicle with summer tires versus a front-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive vehicle with winter tires, which car is going to be better in the snow? Obviously the one that's front-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive with the snow tires. The reason being, all-wheel drive, four-wheel drive is only going to help you putting the power down. That means accelerating. However, when it comes to braking, when it comes to turning, which technically are forms of acceleration, that's another conversation, that does not help you because it's only your tires doing the work at that point. Where the power is being driven does not matter when you're braking, when you're turning. Now, in most cases, actually a front-wheel drive vehicle with snow tires is better than a rear-wheel drive vehicle with snow tires, assuming that the engine is in the front, therefore with a constant coefficient of friction, meaning the grip level is not changing, but you're changing the weight, the mass over that front wheel, you're gonna have more traction with a front-wheel drive vehicle with the engine in the front. However, if you're going uphill, right, and now the weight is getting pushed back, then yeah, maybe the rear-wheel drive vehicle would have an example. If you're driving a 911 that is rear-wheel drive and the engine is in the back, then you're already getting a lot more weight over those rear tires, and that's gonna help with traction. Long story short, what's far more important than where the wheels are being driven is actually what kind of tires you have. Because guess what? You have your all-wheel drive SUV on summer tires and you're in the snow and you need to stop because there's a pileup ahead, you slam on the brakes, your all-wheel drive isn't helping you at all. You're gonna slide right into the back. People don't understand the importance of tires in these situations. Number 8, the most toxic and common car guy misconception is this idea of built, not bought. The idea that if you build something yourself, you are more valuable or better than the person who bought something. And sure, you have some skills, you have some tools, you have more time than the person who bought something. But that doesn't make you a better or worse car enthusiast or better or worse person. When I first started tracking, I did all the work on my own car because I was trying to save money. I had more time, I didn't have much cash, and I said, you know what? I'm gonna get the tools, use my time, and save money by doing my own brake fluid flush and brake pads and brake rotors as well, and oil changes and things like that. However, as I've become a better driver after doing track days and autocross for several years, I'm a much better driver now, yet I spend far less time working on my own car. I buy rather than build, right? Does that make me a worse car enthusiast? I'm a better driver now than I was when I was working on my own car. But it's just that my value system has changed. One thing that I'm doing as an entrepreneur is trying to be mindful of how I use my time. And oftentimes you have to set your hourly rate as an aspirational number. Let's say I would love my hourly rate to be worth $1,000 per hour. It's not right now, but I want it to be there. I'm never gonna get there by treating my hourly rate as $20 per hour. In other words, the only way I will make the equivalent of $1,000 per hour is if I start treating my time with that level of value and respect. To say, no, I'm not gonna go buy my own groceries. I'm gonna pay Amazon $10 to deliver my Whole Foods to me once per week. I'm gonna save a ton of time by doing so, and I'm valuing my time higher, freeing up that time to work on things that help grow my business. Or I can do courses, right? I buy a lot of courses for myself to become a better entrepreneur. I sell courses for med students and pre-meds that wanna become better students. I can invest in myself with that time. I can invest in my business with that time, and I don't have to use my time in that way because it's better or important or, oh my God, I gotta build, not buy. Money can mean a ton of different things to a ton of different people. It can be freedom, it can be security, it can be love in a very toxic way that I don't recommend. But for many people, it means time. You can buy your time back. And the funny thing is, if you actually buy something, if I buy a Porsche that is slower than your LS swapped Miata, and I'm driving a Miata right now, I would still take the Porsche because there's more than just straight line performance or lap times to a vehicle. And when you start building a vehicle as well, we did this, speaking of Porsches, it was a 991.2 GT3 with a 4.2 liter built engine, amazing vehicle, but it went into limp mode multiple times when my buddy was driving it. There are issues when a car is built and not bought. You're not gonna have the same level of reliability often, and you're gonna take a risk at times with things like build quality, safety. There's absolutely no shame and nothing wrong with buying rather than building. And anyone who tells you otherwise is trying to gatekeep and virtue signal. They just have a broke mindset and can't imagine other people thinking in a different way that is also valid and actually possibly even more valuable in certain ways. If you want to build it, cool. If you want to buy it, cool. I respect you either way, because at the end of the day, what's more important is that you're car enthusiasts and you're working on improving your driver skill. My friends, let me know what you think of these 8 car guy misconceptions with a comment down below. Much love, and I'll see you all in that next one. Dude, I love that just like that, I can put the top up. Fucking money. I love this car.